All right, to call the meeting to order, it's now 7:30. Thank you all for joining us on this balmy evening. All of us did get blown away like the boxes, or poor recycling guys had to pick up everything all over the street. Anyway, I'd like to call the meeting to order, and I'd like to ask for Commander Bob Foster to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So would you please rise and face the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commander. I'd like to now ask Eastchester Police Officer Betsy Vucinaj to please lead us in the national anthem. Officer?
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Ask the clerk to kindly call the roll.
Councilman Giacobi. Here. Councilwoman Nicholson. Here. Councilwoman Martin. Here. Councilman Markocha. Here. Supervisor Covia.
Here. Good evening, everyone. So let's proceed with this special meeting of the Eastchester Town Board on December 22nd, 2025. And it'll be somewhat of a brief meeting. My function here is to basically get the ball rolling, introduce the town clerk, who will speak a little more detail about this event. But the point we are gathered here is to establish the 250th anniversary committee for the town of Eastchester and the two villages of Tuckahoe and Bronxville. And as many of you may recall, back when we celebrated our 350th birthday here in Eastchester, we had a grand celebration. It was a lot of fun, and everybody participated, and really it was quite moving, to say the least. And many of you may remember back in 1976, when this country celebrated its 200th birthday. And being a lifer, I remember the parade vividly. It marched right down White Plains Road. And if you recall White Plains Road, there used to be an island in the middle of White Plains Road and Mill Road. But it got hit so many times, it was reduced to something no greater than a milk carton with a pole sticking out of it. So they ended up removing that to clear the path for the 1976 parade. So I thought that was a good move. But anyway, we are establishing this committee. I'll review the members in a few moments, but the purpose will be to basically to plan the events for the coming year. And we're talking about perhaps a parade, maybe some concerts. We're working with our veterans here to get an armed forces band in, which we think would be phenomenal. Fireworks, maybe a family barbecue, certainly some educational and historical programs. We will certainly rotate between the two villages and the town. Also, I'd like to certainly see some kind of commemorative banners or flags that we can all get and hang proudly on our homes to really pull everything together and pull the town together and establish for the rest of the county and perhaps the rest of the country that Eastchester takes its history very seriously. But I wanted to just give a brief overview on the events leading up to and including the first known town meeting and election held after the Revolutionary War, which was coincidentally on a Monday night on December 22nd in the year 242 years ago, and in the year 1783. And it's strange how I had mentioned this at a town board meeting, and I said it was the first town board meeting we were commemorating, and of course I neglected to say post-Revolutionary War. So the history buffs on the board jumped all over me and said, no, come on. It's after the Revolutionary War, so I won't make that mistake again. But as you know, we were formed 361 years ago, and 242 years ago, they did their first meeting post-Revolutionary War. And the last meeting before the war was held on April 5th, 1774. Back then, the meetings were held once a year, so I presume there was no 5-minute rule at that time for that meeting. But from 1775, of course, to September 3rd, 1783, the Revolutionary War occurred. Samuel Stedden was the town clerk at that meeting, but to hold a meeting once a year was quite an undertaking. The first meeting after the war, as I mentioned, contained just the meeting minutes and, of course, the election itself, which was held on Monday the 22nd, 1783. And there were no records of any meetings between 1774 and 1783, I guess because we were at war with the British at that time. It was during that time that Eastchester was considered neutral ground. We were neutral ground. And if you've ever listened to Dick Froliano speak, and God rest his soul, I wish he would be here tonight for us, because this is right up his alley. He would have loved this. He would always say that Eastchester was part of the neutral ground. What is neutral ground? By way of background, it was the area that was basically in between the British troops and the American troops. It was the most crime-ridden area in the 13 colonies. It was pretty violent here at that point. And to the north were the American forces, and to the south were the British forces. And closest to the British troops, of course, was Eastchester. And we were near the southern border of the neutral ground. And it was quite eventful. There were skirmishes and raids in Eastchester constantly. We have all heard of several of the skirmishes that went on, but far much worse and more frequent were the devastating raids by farmlands from all of the troops that were here fighting. There were two primary groups: the Skinners, who claimed to be loyal to the Americans, and the Cowboys, who claimed to be loyal to the British. Either way, raids occurred frequently on both sides. Even the churches were not spared from this raiding and looting. St. Paul's Church, which, as you know, is in Mount Vernon presently, but was all part of the town of Eastchester back at this time, had its bell removed. And people suspected that the removal of the bell wasn't from vandalism, but it was to keep it out of British hands, who would have turned it into bullets to shoot the American revolutionaries with it. And all of a sudden, of course, after the war ended, it miraculously appeared and was rehung again. But tonight's meeting back in 1783 was called by order of the sheriff of the county of Westchester, the sheriff of the county of Westchester, and under the superintendence of Stephen Ward, who was the last pre-war supervisor, and Ebenezer S. Burling, who was the person who was the candidate to become the new supervisor. The names have changed quite a bit since back then, I guess. This was done pursuant to the ordinance for holding elections in the southern part of the state by act of the legislature entitled, "An Act to Provide for the Temporary Government of the Southern Parts of this State, whenever the enemy shall abandon or be dispossessed of the same, and until the legislature shall be convened." This was passed on October 23rd, 1779, and of course our meeting took place in 1783. This meeting corresponded with Evacuation Day, which was November 25th, 1783, the day the British moved out of New York, which was a wonderful, wonderful day. So at this point, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Town Clerk Joseph Dooley to continue the program.
Thank you. Thank you. Being the town clerk, one of my biggest responsibilities is keeping records of the history of the town. And our records go back to 1664 or even before that. So, and we have all those records, which is pretty amazing. And we'll tell a little story on how some of them got here at this meeting in 1783. But again, one of my biggest roles is keeping records, marriage licenses, handicap placards, parking permits. We do all that stuff now. Back then, it was a little different. There was a lot of similarities, but there are some differences. The clerk's role back then was rereading official documents, keeping records, publicizing information, and dispersing riots. I guess if there was ever a riot at one of your meetings, I was responsible for taking care of things. I'm glad that doesn't happen anymore. We have these guys back there in blue, so. There were 46 clerks, including myself, since 1664. Linda Laird and Patty Dorwin were my predecessors, and they were carried the torch for like 34 years, so a long period. Richard Shute was our first town clerk, and he became the clerk in 1673. And at the first meeting that took place in 1783, Charles Ward was nominated and elected clerk of the town of Eastchester. The next official, I guess, was the second most important back then, was the supervisor. And as Supervisor Colavita mentioned, Ebenezer Burling was the supervisor that was elected at that meeting. And his role was a little bit different as well. You know, he ran the meetings, which was important. He was responsible for health and crime in the area. He ran the budget, he does that today, and he administered relief for the poor. So he collected money from residents and administered funds to the poor when as needed. So that was a big part of his role. The next officers that were elected were the constable and collector. That was one title, and that was William Crawford. And his role was, he was responsible for keeping order in town. So sort of as a police officer, a constable, and also for collecting taxes. He would knock on your door and collect taxes. The next slate was in the area called assessor and fence damage viewers. So they would assess the value of properties, and they'd also make sure all the boundaries were proper. So if there were any property disputes, they would go out and look at the fencing or the walls to make sure everything, was in accordance with what it should have been. The next slate was the overseers of the road, which is, I guess, is similar to the highway superintendent today. They were responsible for the highways in towns, not the highways, the roads. We didn't have highways then. The next group was called ponders, and at first I didn't know what a ponder was. I don't know if anybody here knows what a ponder was, but a ponder would make sure that if a cow or some kind of livestock wandered off somebody's property, that they went out and retrieved it and made sure it got back to the proper owner. Or if there was a dispute over, livestock, they would get involved there. So that was the ponder. We had two ponders, William Crawford and James Morgan. And then the next slate was to take care of the edifices. That was to take care of the buildings, the public buildings in town. So that was the slate that ran back then. We didn't have justices as we do today. We didn't have town council. We didn't have a town attorney, so things are a little bit different. But you see some similarities how things evolved. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Sheila, who's going to introduce the next phase of the program.
Good evening. Thank you, Joe. As we head into our nation's 250th anniversary, the Historical Society will be celebrating 67 years in the community. And I just wanted to acknowledge many of the members who are here tonight, co-presidents Jack Flannery and Lissa Halen. We have members Ellen Del Cole, Ted Kutze, former Anne Marie Sweeney is here, and Paul Carlo, former member, along with Kathy Muscat. And together, we do a lot of things in the community. We do a lot of events during the year, a lot of programs, but there's three things that we really like to do. One of them is talking about the rich history of the town of Eastchester. The second is teaching the very rich history, and we do that all through the year. Literally hundreds of school children come through the Marble Schoolhouse, they come through the library, and we teach them all about the one-room schoolhouse and, of course, the history of the town of Eastchester. And, of course, Dick Foliano did that for decades, and he taught us all really so much about this time. And the last thing that we do, when we can, we like to dress up and we like to reenact things whenever possible. So we thought it would be fun this evening to provide you, if we could, with what we think a little snapshot of what might have happened at that meeting. We don't really know. We can only, imagine how that encounter went. But here to do that are three members from the Historical Society this evening. We have Mike Grillo, who is here this evening as Supervisor Stephen Ward, Jack Flannery, who is here this evening as the son of Samuel Sneeden, Robert Sneeden, and of course Jenny Steinhagen, also a member, is going to be just a townsperson at that meeting that evening. So if you would come up and give us a little idea of how that meeting went, close to 242 years ago. Thank you.
The British have finally evacuated New York on November 25th, 1783. In the time here in Eastchester, on behalf of my father, I have kept these records, the 4 books of the whole records of the town of Eastchester. So I present them to you, Supervisor Ward, on behalf of the Sneeden family.
Thank you, Mr. Sneeden. A lot of you remembered what went on here in this town these last 8 years during this war for independence and how it tore our community apart. My own family, my own brother, Edmund Ward, sided with the British, fled to the city of New York. Right now, he's probably somewhere up in Nova Scotia with 30,000 other Americans that decided to be loyal to the crown. In front of my own house, which was incidentally burned down by the Queen's Rangers back in 1777, which is just a mile from where I'm standing right now. In front of my house, Captain Samuel Crawford, a very brave patriot, was bayoneted right there. And I do remember when I first heard about that incident and how it ripped my heart to pieces. There's other individuals too in this town. There happens to be a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Fowler, member of the church vestry at St. Paul's. He's the one who decided to have that church built back in 1763. But when his sons joined the Continental Army, especially his son Theodosius Fowler in March of 1776, he refused to speak to his son ever again. There's also another family, the Pell family, Samuel Pell. Samuel Pell joined the 2nd New York. He was at the Battle of Quebec in December of 1775 with General Montgomery and also General Arnold. He made it to the rank of major at the end of the war, and this poor fellow was engaged to his second cousin, Mary Pell. She breaks off the engagement when she finds out her fiancé is a member of the Continental Army, fighting against Great Britain. And she tells him, "I will not allow the stench of the smell of your person inside my home." I feel very bad for Mr. Samuel Pell. But these are just many of examples how this community was torn apart, especially even the county of Westchester County. We call it a neutral ground, but truth be known, you wake up any moment, you don't know who's controlling this village. Is it the British? Do we have control? We simply don't know. But I'm very grateful that the British finally left us a month ago on the 25th of November. We are now finally at peace. And from an affidavit I received from our fellow neighbor here, Robert Sneeden, he told me that these were the books, these were the records that were kept on the person of his father, deceased Samuel Sneeden. Now you can hold your election. Now we can live freely on our own.
The actual books that were delivered at that meeting are here. And we have in the counter and display in the cubbyhole over here by the clerk's office some of the original documents from that era. We have all the original documents going back to 1664. Most of them you can't even read because the Old English, the spelling, their spelling was worse than mine. Thank God for spell check these days. But And the way they wrote back then was just illegible to most of us. But in 1962 through 1994, some women from the Historical Society took those books and translated them into readable English. And it's pretty amazing if you can ever, like, I skim through them all the time, and it's amazing what happened back then. One of the things that kind of stood out to me around this period was that, not in this meeting, but the very next meeting that took place in April of 1784, they started out April 6th, the 8th year of independence. It didn't mention the year, but it said the 8th year of independence, which was pretty neat. And then the following year, they mentioned the year and the 9th year of independence. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But I'd like you all to take a look at some of the samples that we have out there in the cabinet. They're amazing to look at. And it's really amazing that we still have them here, you know, going back that far. But that was so key when they bought these books back. They survived the war, who knows how, but they were bought back, and then they were kept here, and they've been restored to as best they could be. They're not in the books that they originally came in, but they're loose papers. Some of them have been rebound into other books, but you'll see when you get out there, it's pretty amazing. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to the supervisor again to get into the committee aspect of the meeting.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it, to have the actual text sitting in that case about 30 feet from us. And if you've ever seen, I've had the pleasure of seeing the deed to the town, it's about that big. You know, as an attorney working with thousands of reams of paper, to see a deed on a little piece of paper like this, it's quite impressive. And we took also the covenant of the town, which was created in 1665. We duplicated that, and it hangs out on above the mantle on the outside, so that when you first walk into Town Hall, the first thing that you see is the covenant and the deed. And it was also, I thought, very fitting back in on the 350th anniversary that all of the members of all of the boards all signed a proclamation attesting to and adopting the covenant again. I thought that was pretty impressive. So keep in mind as you walk around the building right now and you see these different things. But so let's get to the business at hand, and that is the constitution of this committee. So this will be a committee of the Recreation Department. And presently, I've heard from the following people who would like to be involved. And of course, anyone is welcome to be involved, to be a member of the committee. Also, just to join us on whatever level you like would be perfectly acceptable, because we have much to do. The Eastchester Town Board, Luigi Marcocha, Teresa Nicholson, Anthony Giacobbe, and Sheila Marcotte. I'm going to designate Sheila as a co-chair, together with co-chair designee Joseph Dooley. Also, Sally Veltiti, who is the chair of, I should say, the superintendent of recreation. She'll be ex officio. Sally, thank you for all your anticipated work. From the Historical Society, Jack Flannery, Lisa Halen, also Jenny Steinhagen, and Michael Grillo. From the Village of Bronxville, Mary Marvin said she'd be delighted to serve. Ray Gesselbrock, the village historian. Marilyn Hill, chairman emeritus of the Historical Conservancy. And Peggy Conway, a local resident. Friends of the Ward House, Sal Provenzano is here. Where is Sal? Just saw Sal. Thank you, Sal, for being here. Along with Elaine Provenzano for the Tuckahoe History Committee. And the first to sign up, the first ones through the door, our Eastchester veterans, Bob Foster and Vito Pinto. Thank you guys for coming in. So we'll have additions to this for sure, but this will be our town committee through the Recreation Department. So I would make the motion to accept the formation of the committee and also the appointees as enumerated. Would someone care to make a second?
I'll second.
All right, thank you very much. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilman Giacobbe?
Aye.
Councilwoman Nicholson?
Aye.
Councilwoman Marcotte? Aye. Councilman Marcocha?
Aye.
Supervisor Cody?
Aye. All right, so that's our start in 2025. So 2026 will be probably a very eventful year. If anybody has any ideas farm them through the committee. There is no pride of authorship. If someone has a great idea, we'll take it and run with it. We may do a little fundraising. We've squirreled a couple of dollars away in our budget in anticipation of some events that we'll be working on. Particularly, I think a fireworks display would be wonderful. And if the military bands need lodging and, of course, need to be fed, we'll take care of them too. But be on the lookout for notices. If you could, when we reach out to you, my office will reach out to everybody. Just give us your email so we can create a group and we can just bang everything out through email. And if you can spare your cell phone, that'd be great too, so we can keep things moving and get everybody included. So with that being said, that concludes our event. We have a reception planned. Obviously, there's a document you can look at, and if I'm not mistaken, the document, the first book on the left is opened up to tonight's meeting 242 years ago. The actual page of minutes of the meeting is open, and there's some refreshments served and all. So anyone can make a motion to adjourn? Second. All in favor? Aye. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.